Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blank Gates. We have come a long way. We've learned the big 5 personality traits. We have learned about Fogg's motivation model. And now we are going to zero in on something that is more important. Why? Because the thing is that, okay, so I understand the big 5 personalities, and I was able to zero in about what is my relative level of neuroticism. And I've been able to kind of realize that I'm basically a crazy, wild eyed scientist who is desperately trying to increase my conscientiousness level so I can become more like an innovator. And then also, I am generally a what did I call it? What was it? Gentle giant. Okay, so I'm like basically a gentle giant, and I am trying to increase my extroversion because I want to become. Do I want to become a party person? This is the thing. Every time I go through these things with people, they're always saying that all of this is relative. It depends on the situation that I'm in, because every situation I'm going to like imagine you have like 100 different personalities inside of you, and the personality that shows up for that experience is going to be the one that you think it's appropriate for that experience. And so actually I used to have this crazy thing I used to teach students, but then like people, they started just basically canceling their lessons after I explained it to them. It goes back to when I was living in Hollywood and I found this casting agent, and she was doing tutoring, and she was trying to help young kids that were preparing to become actors to understand emotions and how to control their emotions and how to understand that there are constant situations where they may be like having to change their personalities or to channel different types of energy or different types of personalities. And that's the whole concept there with these big 5 personalities. And she said, when you walk into a room and you feel like this overwhelming emotion, I think actors and actresses are generally pretty high in neuroticism. And she said, okay, so here's the trick. You want to ask this question, is it me or someone else? And what that does is it just cuts the connection between what you might be picking up, right? If you are high in empathy, so this is the technical definition of the term empathy. It means your ability to understand and feel other people's emotions. Well, what does that actually mean technically? That means that somebody's emotional waves are hitting you, and you're like a receiver and you're feeling other people's emotions. Before I went through intense emotional experiences where my body said, hey, it's time that you understand more deeply people's emotions so that you don't get hurt again. Remember last time we were talking about how when you are naive and you have these big expectations and then eventually you're hurt and then you become judgmental. So your agreeableness level goes down, but then eventually you're going to heal, and then you're going to learn, and then you're going to be able to see. And then that's when you're going to be able to have more empathy. What we're talking about is your ability to forgive, and also your ability to take a step back. Is it me or someone else? And then to be able to discern what's happening in that situation. So she said, is it me or someone else? And then there's actually the next question. So after like many years of like just detaching myself emotionally from all the different energy around me, well, is this a business channel? Now it's starting to sound like a crazy channel. Anyways, now you can see why some people had a hard time with that lesson. And eventually what happens is, okay, so the next question is the right Blaine showing up to handle this situation? And then it's like, whoa. So you ask that question, and now your personalities align based on the situation. So 1 is to detach yourself from that emotion of other people. And then 2 is to make sure that the right personality is showing up. Well, that just means that we have different personalities, just like we have different appetites. Like I wanted eggs for breakfast. I don't want eggs for dinner. And so we have all these different levels of desire and interest, and they're constantly fluctuating. If we go back to an economic principle of like satisfaction, if you eat a bag of popcorn, the last kernel is not as satisfying as the first. That's why the context is important when we start talking about the 5 personality traits. These personality tests, okay, but like what's the context? Why do I need to know how you are defining my personality in a limited amount of context? Is this generally for all contexts, or is this specific for some specific context? And this is why I feel like it's not really connected to work. Because when we get to work, we're actually providing a very specific function. I think that it's more important to understand what are the functions of work rather than like, I need to understand like all, what did we come up with? We can basically say that there's 9 ways to approach a situation, and then we can approach that situation overly emotional, or we can approach the situation overly logical, or somewhere in between. So that gives us 18. That's what we figured out in the last video, is there's 18 different personalities. And the argument I'm trying to make right now is that the question is, who's going to show up? So is it me or someone else? Okay. And is the best Blaine showing up to the situation? Okay. And okay, so now what's the context and which Blaine showed up? Did the gentle giant show up, or did the pushy, difficult boss show up? Did the crazy, wild-eyed scientist show up, or did the auditor show up? Or is it somewhere in between? Or is it like the party people, innovator? It's like, okay, so there's all these different Blaines that could show up. Which one showed up? And that's why at some point it's like, okay, so let's stop talking about personality, because what we're trying to discuss is work. I'm trying to express the context of work. And when we go into my course, the very first chapter is, I call it the corporate menu. And it's based on a blog article written by Thomas Buchholz, where he describes the work world in terms of 7 different roles. The more and more I spoke about these roles with different people, the more it started to float into basically 3 columns. There's 3 very specific functions that happen in a business. And then that's like the macro, like what people do we need inside of a business? 7. All right. And what are the functions that they represent? 3. Okay. When we talk about actual programs or projects, when we go into the book Create Crucial Insight by Thomas Buchholz, he talks about the endeavor element. What he's saying is, if there's an endeavor, then there are these 3 elements. There is some connection between the endeavor elements and these 3 different columns. So in the next video, we're going to look at some examples of these 3 different columns to help you understand that principle a little better. And if you want to deep dive into those principles, then you can always buy my course, and then you're going to get that and a whole bunch of more stuff, which we'll talk about throughout in the next couple of months.